It's quite popular among pro-natalists in Britain and elsewhere to point out that the ideal number of children is above replacement when you ask people. I struggle to be optimistic on that front, though. So people will say, well, the average woman wants to have 2.3 children or whatever. All we have to do is tweak things and provide cheaper housing and whatever other government intervention, and then people will naturally do that. And I say, yeah, okay, but revealed preference is that people are not actually having that many children. The analogy that was used by Catherine McCulloch when she came on my show a little while ago, she's written this really good book about American women who have both been to university and had 5 or more children, i.e. unicorns, right?
And as children, I ordered it from Amazon. It's taking a while to arrive.
It's very, very interesting. It's something I think it's a book I think about a lot when it comes to this. It's all qualitative, but actually the qualitative research is more reveals a great deal. She draws this parallel between, if we bought everyone, if the government gave everyone trainers, bought everyone really nice pairs of trainers, would we see the number of people running marathons increase? And she's like, maybe a little bit. There might be 1 or 2 people who would run marathons if only they had the trainers. But that's basically not the reason why people aren't running marathons. It's because actually running a marathon is really difficult and it takes a long time and a lot of effort. And the government can't do that for you. The government will not be there for you at the 20th mile. The government won't be there for you at 3 o'clock in the morning when your baby's crying. I think people basically just actually are not that motivated. That's what we're discovering. And there are only so many tweaks. I'm sorry, I'm getting all pessimistic about this. And I know that that's not, we must try and be optimistic on this front. But I am generally skeptical of the idea of policy tweaks being the answer to any of this.
Well, there were 2 things I'd say on that. The first is, if people said in surveys they wanted 1.5 children, that would be a cause of pessimism. Let us at least be glad that that's the starting point, even if it's not high enough on their lists of priorities, even if revealed preference suggests something different. At least in principle, they want that. So we've got something to work with. The second thing I would say is that government policy can only go so far. I think it's absolutely correct that helping people with housing and childcare and maternity leave is really important, but it's not going to crack the problem. As I often say, if you look at places in Britain where housing is cheap, they don't have a high fertility rate. If you look at Germany, much of Germany has cheap housing. Southeast Asia, the Balkans, many of those countries have cheap housing and they don't have a high fertility rate. Childcare is the other sort of big cost. And again, where it's highly subsidised and very cheap, and it is ridiculously expensive in the UK, but where it's really cheap and very subsidised in a lot of European countries, it's still the case that fertility rates are very low. So someone was putting it to me the other day, it's the kind of Guardian view of the world. Unless things are absolutely perfect, of course, women won't have children, and you can always blame capitalism or whatever it is. And, that may be true, but fertility rates were pretty low under real existing socialism as well. So if the answer is we need perfection, we need some kind of paradise where nobody has any economic constraints, where there's no racism, exploitation, sexism, and all the other terrible things in the universe, and we all live in a kind of paradise, and then maybe children will be born. Well, we all know we're not going to get there, and we can have those socioeconomic debates about what's the right level of tax and spend, and what are the right social attitudes, but we're never going to get to that kind of Guardianista paradise. And we know that people have had children in much worse conditions than us, materially. In fact, I call it the paradox of fertility, that as countries get richer, they find it harder and harder to afford children. And that when you look geographically, it's the poor countries. So whether it's historical or geographical that you analyse it, the richer people get, or the richer countries, the lower the fertility rate. So there's something much deeper than purely material conditions. Governments do seem to be able to do certain tweaks. I wouldn't dismiss that. And I think it's worth government experimenting, trying things out. But the other thing is culture. As we've said now, people tend to say that politics is downstream from culture, and I kind of parroted that. And I think there is an extent to which it's true. But I've been working quite recently. I've written a paper with an economist called Philip Pilkington, and we did that for the art conference, and we've written another paper for Policy Exchange, which should be coming out soon. And he said, why do you think that politics is downstream from culture? Sometimes it's upstream. And I think he's right. In other words, and he's living in Hungary now, so he's probably close to the source. Politics can shift culture. And there are famous examples of, the legalization of homosexuality, for example, and the
example.
ending of the death penalty were both cases where the politicians, good or ill, and I certainly, wouldn't want to live in a world where homosexuality was illegal. So I think that's good. But we live in a world where there are cases where the politicians have led the culture, and the culture has caught up, sometimes decades later. So I think we shouldn't just look at the political world and say politics equals policy equals economics incentives. There is actually a role for politics to nudge the culture along. So, what does that actually mean? Well, the first thing I would say it means is that here we are in the UK, 50 years into sub-replacement fertility rates, and no government minister, as far as I know, has ever addressed this issue. So, as I often say, it's very early in the debate because nobody's really talking about it, but it's very late. So here we are 50 years on, where we had two generations that are too small, and yet we haven't even got the discussion underway. So one of the things I always say when people want policy detail from me is we're not even going to get, there's no point in going into great details on British policy until we get to a world where the people who are talking about this stuff are not just a few backbenchers, brave backbenchers like Miriam Cates, but actually it goes mainstream. When I talk about it, when people like Miriam talk about it, probably when people like you talk about it, you get a look. People roll their eyes. There's some, I was mentioning to you earlier, I was on yesterday, Radio 4 with Amal Rajan, and he's fantastic, really interested in it. And good old Rajan's had his fourth kid, so delighted for him. But in the mainstream world, it's really unusual. And in the political world, it's really unusual. So I think the first thing we need to do is mainstream, horrible verb, forgive me, mainstream the discussion. And that's why I've written my book, because lots of people are starting to talk about it, albeit not people at the political centre. People are, like Stephen Shaw, have done great work talking on podcasts. He's done a video, and people are writing articles. But I don't think, Catherine's book, I'm looking forward to reading. But what I'm trying to write, and I don't think anyone else has done it, I haven't found it, is a comprehensive pro-natalist book that simply says what's going on with fertility rates, why this is bad news, how we can answer objections to raising it, feminism, something you and I have discussed in the past, can we have a pro-natal feminism, immigration, why that's not the ultimate fix, AI, technology, environmental concerns. So taking head on, I suppose, those four major areas where people push back, and then talking about what we might do and how we might crack this one. So that's the structure of my book. I'm sorry, I've come on to plugging my book, which wasn't, I've sort of wandered unintentionally onto that territory. But that's why I think in this debate, in this cultural shift that I think we need, there is space for a book, and that's why I've written one. And that's my little contribution towards nudging the culture. I mean, I've got no delusions that this alone is going to make all that much difference, but it might play into something bigger. It does rather remind me, though, I was at the Battle of Ideas, which Claire Fox organises, and I was talking about this. This was in the autumn of 2022, and I said that in July I'd written this rather notorious article for the Sunday Times, which they chose to headline, "Is it time to tax the childless?" And I said, I can't promise that I've stirred up a fertility boom across the country, but within 2 menstrual cycles of my article, both my daughters were pregnant. So at least I'm having a little effect at home. I've since become a grandpa and with a third on the way. So, I have an effect perhaps on the small family circle. And I'm trying to have an effect on the wider national and international debate. We have to shift the culture. No one person is going to do that. And if it was one person, it wouldn't be me. But that is essentially what I'm trying to do.